Welcome, fans, to the 50th episode of Changeover Chat, presented by Sportmaster Sports Surfaces. I'm your host, Randy Master. Today's guest is one of the most accomplished sports executives in the world. She was one of the first female agents to break ground in athlete representation. She rose to the head of Octagon's worldwide tennis division and was also a press officer at the ATP Tour. Our guest grew up in the Netherlands, attended the American School of Paris and Delaware Graduate School. She is fluent in 5 languages and is currently president of the WTA Tour since 2015. Please welcome Micky Lawler.
Thank you, Randy. That's quite an introduction. I'm not sure I deserve it, but thank you very much. And I'm really honored to be the 50th guest.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. And what language should we do this in?
Swahili. Let's do English.
Okay, so Micky, your path into tennis was not a traditional one. It was almost by chance that you started in the sport. Can you take us through the story and how well did you know tennis before you just kind of, in some way, kind of stumbled into a job?
I had always played tennis growing up, but it wasn't the only sport that I played. But I actually didn't grow up in the Netherlands, although I am Dutch, but I lived in first in Colombia, then in Argentina, then Bolivia, where tennis is the sport, especially for girls and boys. But as a girl, you know, you either played field hockey or you played tennis. So I played tennis, and no, and volleyball and basketball. But in any case, after school, I played tennis and I joined a team, and I always was a huge fan, and everyone in my family played tennis. My grandparents, my grandfather was a professional athlete. He was a soccer player. And so tennis has always been a big part of my life. And then after I graduated with a master's from Delaware, I had to go back to Europe because I didn't have a working visa to stay in the States. And so I went to France, to Paris, and interviewed. I had a job interview there. And the reason why I went to Paris is because I thought I had a job there lined up. And in those days, it was in the mid 80s, you were asked, how fast can you type and how's your shorthand? And I'd done a very, specialized degree in applied linguistics, and it was a lot of hard work, and I didn't want to waste all that work in being somebody's administrative assistant, although of course, there's a lot of value in being somebody's administrative assistant. But anyway, long story short, I ended up teaching at a language school, teaching executives at a language school. So I had to teach, for example, the executive assistant of the SNCF, which is the French train system, how to work in English on the phone, just on the phone. And then I ended up teaching the CEO of the SNCF and other people in Paris. And on my way to one of the lessons, I was reading the International Herald Tribune, and there was an ad for a press attaché for the men's tour, the Nabisco Grand Prix. So I applied and I got the job. And it was completely by chance because actually, so I was on my way to one of my lessons, and it was the CEO of a big French company, and he said, Micky, you have to apply for this job. And he said, I'll be your reference. And we used to play tennis on the weekends. I would go out to his country home and we played tennis. And so he was even more excited than I was. But yeah, it was my predecessor at the Nabisco Grand Prix was also Dutch. And so it all clicked, and have never looked back since.
Well, it's an incredible story, and you move on to a big job at what was Advantage International, eventually
Yeah.
rising to the top and running their tennis division. Your first client I read at Advantage was an Argentinian named Alberto Mancini. He was a top 10 player. He's coached Guillermo Coria. He's now the coach, and I didn't know this, of Fabio Fonini of about 3 or 4 months.
Yes.
Do you still keep in touch with your first client? And what did you learn from him? And what did he learn from you?
Oh, well, absolutely. So he and I, when I was on the Nabisco Grand Prix working for the MIPTC, which was the predecessor, well, the ATP was a member, as were the slams and the ITF. Maybe we should get back to that sort of governance. But anyway, so when I was on the Nabisco Grand Prix, Alberto was 18. He was very young, and he rose to the top very quickly. And so, um, just like I did with Michael Chang, for example, who came on tour when he was very young, I felt the responsibility of being like a big sister to them and guiding them through this new life that awaited them with a lot of public eyes on them. And I would say in the case of Alberto, we are still very close. And I would say to him, don't think that because you can hold a tennis racket the way you do that you can get away with some of this stuff. So, you better stay true to your values. And um, so so we became very close. And this world to me has been much more than a job. Obviously, it's been my life. My kids have grown up in it, and two of the three are in it. And so I do keep in touch with him, and he took a big chance on me at the time. So when I moved to Advantage, which is now Octagon, he came with me, and he and I sat my first day on the job. We sat behind a desk at the French Open and a typewriter, and we typed out the contract, his representation contract. And and so that's how it happened. And we're still very good friends. And I know that he's doing really well. And I think Fabio's very lucky to have him as a coach. He's a great heart and soul.
Yeah, for sure. Mickey, when I think, it's interesting, when I think of agents, and just agents, whether they're tennis agents, football, basketball, hockey, I always think of the movie Jerry Maguire. I mean, it seems crazy, but I do. And I was thinking about the time you spent as an agent and relationships that you had with players. And people don't know exactly what that personal relationship is. I wanted to quote Jerry Maguire speaking to his client, Rod Tidwell. He says, "I'm out here for you. You don't know what it's like to be out here for you. It is an up at dawn, pride swallowing siege that I will never fully tell you about." Have you ever felt like that, Mickey, where it's
Yeah.
just they don't understand what you're going through and you're up
Yes.
and there's a whole world that they're not aware of?
We actually consulted with the producers and the whole team of the Jerry Maguire movie. And it when I watched it for the first time, I remember, I'll never forget it. I was with a bunch of colleagues, and I burst out into tears, and I couldn't stop crying. Now, this is not unusual for me in the movie theater, but it was out of control sadness because he didn't get it. And it is kind of this devotion. It's missing birthdays of your children, and being torn into to especially when the kids are little. And um, recruiting Richard Krajicek when he was young. And I worked with Richard, and I'm still very close to Richard as well. It is this bond that it's based on trust. And I have this huge responsibility for you, So accept it and thank me for it. And I'm thanking you for it, but also, recognize some of the stuff that has to happen for you. And so when I was recruiting Richard Krejcik, I remember that a competing agent, I was pregnant with my third child. and or no, maybe it was my second child. Yeah, it was my second child because he won Wimbledon in 96. So definitely the second one. And this competing agent said to Richard's business advisors, "Are you kidding? You're going to go with a pregnant woman? Do you know how tough this world is, and what has to be done on Richard's behalf?" And then his main business advisor, the guy who had helped him financially get to the world stage, he sat me down, and I shouldn't have been traveling by that time anymore, but I was based in London, and so I just drove to Holland. And the guy said, "You know what? I have watched you do this, and you are like a lioness with her cubs. So you've got the job. You you worked hard for this. The job is yours."
God. Well,
And yeah, and there's so many of those really fantastic memories that it is an amazing past
yeah, and one
and
other,
presence. Present.
yeah, one other player that I saw, one other player that I saw that you managed was a guy named Paul Harhus, and you may remember unfortunately he's kind of known for that point with Connors at the U.S. Open where Connors got back about you know 17 overheads that he hit, and I've always felt sorry for Harhus because they play that over and over and over and over again. Did that affect him at all? Because it just seems like it's a
No,
point that
no. Paul is a very smart guy. That he's again an incredible human being, human soul whose world is much bigger than that. And he's got great perspective. He can laugh at himself. He's actually very funny. And that is something that's only relevant in the US. In the rest of the world, he was number one in doubles. He was a top player, incredibly successful, Davis Cup captain, Fed Cup captain. um, you look at what this man has achieved in our sport, and he's up there. And he continues to play legends with Jaco Elting, his longtime doubles partner. And that is a it was an important moment, but also how he dealt with that was equally important.
yeah, yeah, just a blip in his career, it sounds like. So let's
Yeah, exactly.
fast forward to 2015. You become the president of the WTA after about 27 years at Octagon. When I think about
Yeah.
that, Mickey, it's almost like I'm just throwing it out. It's almost like uh, Tony Godsick becoming the head of the ATP tour at some point. It's not apples to apples, really, but you went from 27 years as an agent to a completely different role in tennis, wearing a completely different hat. How tough was it for you to wear that new hat and see the sport from a completely different perspective than you had seen it throughout all of your career to that point?
I have to tell you, I was on the board for 10 years of the WTA before taking the role of president. And it was surprisingly hard. I didn't expect it to be hard because, and in many ways it wasn't, but in many ways it was. So when I started working for Octagon in 1988, on the women's side, and I was mostly on the men's side because of my experience with the MIPTC. So on the women's side, um, only the top women were able to make a nice living and get some sort of financial security. And in fact, if you see those top women today, they still work very hard, and they are responsible for what the tour is today. But at the time when I worked with Phil DiPicciotto, who is the president of Octagon, he was the head of women's tennis. And I think the WTA has a lot to thank Phil for, because he was a visionary in terms of how we're going to grow this game. We are going to go to markets that are, if the men are in the A markets, we're going to go to the B markets. If the men don't have to take chances behind the Iron Curtain in the 80s, late 80s, when it was, just coming down, when the Berlin Wall came down, when Romania and every country on the East started to open up, he took big chances. And he also started with the Kremlin Cup with his partner Alexei Selivanenko and the Russian Tennis Federation. And those were countries that were not considered, you know, um, part of our ecosystem in tennis. So those moves really were very important strategically for the WTA, because it enabled the tour to grow. It enabled the sport of tennis to have a much wider, bigger global footprint combined, the men and the women, and it just created such momentum. He also worked with Steffi Graf, and I think the tour went from Billie and the Original Nine to Chrissy, Martina, Steffi, Monica, etc. There's been a very consistent evolution that has been led by Stardom on this tour. And these female athletes were iconic and transcended every border of every geographic border and every border of sports. So they were world superstars. And I think that has helped us a lot. So I was lucky enough to have been a part of this development, and have worked very closely with Phil for those 27 years. And then when I came onto the WTA, I was so, I knew this sport inside and out. So, and I'd also worked very globally at Octagon in other areas as well. So what was difficult for me was, at Octagon, or at an agency, or at a company, you're given the freedom to just go and do it. And at the WTA, you are dealing with members that own the organization, and so you report into them. And you may not always see eye to eye, or they may not see what you're seeing, and so, but you have to be deferential and respectful, and become go from an entrepreneur free leader to a sort of a service leader. And that transition was difficult for me.
Well, as you as you spoke about the rise of all these women in the WTA tour from the original nine, it's actually a very good segue to my next question. It might be more of a long conversation. We'll try to condense it a bit. But as you know as well as anybody, Mickey, the topic of a combined men's and women's tour, I'm sure you've never heard that, is an age-old question we are still trying to answer, I think. So on my show, in the last 8 months since I started the show, I've had Pam Shriver speak directly about this issue, and she said, "quote Why would the men think this isn't the way to go? Whatever merger might mean." But that's what she was alluding to. Chris Clary of the New York Times, "Tennis is foolish not to follow this path." Stacey Allister, "We need to do what is right for fans. We have such a competitive advantage to other sports." I know that there has been a lot of progress made of late. Is this something we can talk about without having to sit here for another 12 hours? Maybe the progress of where we are now? and the
Hmm.
advocacy of so many important people, like I just mentioned, of a collaboration, merger, whatever you want to call it.
I think that there was a big turning point in the sport when Andrea Gaudenzi came on board as as the chairman of the ATP, working with Massimo Calvelli as the CEO and their whole team. When we were shut down in March, we immediately continued, accelerated the conversations that had started in January. So in January, we met in Australia. The vision that Andrea laid out was around um, same sport, one fan, or how did he phrase it? Anyway, combining,
Yeah.
aggregating, and taking advantage of those salient points. You know, we are a global sport where women and men play on the same stage. So why would we not serve that fan together? So we, of course, you know, all of us also are proponents of this vision. So we started working on that in March, and we now have a fully integrated marketing and content team. And so everything we do together. We we are strategically focused on this combined product, but you know there are also tournaments that are single, just WTA or just ATP, that also have to be served. However, all of our marketing templates and our brand work is is such that it marries very well together. And you know, we did a campaign together, Tennis is Life. We did Tennis United during the shutdown. So we are working very closely together, and looking far beyond marketing and content to other areas where we can, you know, end up in that place of being together. But you know, it's not something that happens overnight. It's bringing two companies together is always difficult. And in this case, you have two very solid governing entities, and you want to you want to end up with one plus one is five, and not go through you know, go through as little pain as possible.
Well, it's great to hear that you're making that much progress. I think the perception sometimes is it's stagnant, and I think I've read enough, and based on speaking with you now, I think there's great progress being made to where
Yes.
tennis fans want to see it go. I want to talk about. I know, Mickey, you represent the tour globally. All of your interests in tennis are surrounded by the fact that you need to see the sport thrive on a global basis. I'm an American. I'm a big American tennis fan. There is what I think is a problem with the number of standalone WTA events in the United States. Right now, you have Charleston, great event, Bob
Mhm.
Moran's event, that he is the tournament director. You have San Jose. You have Cleveland that is getting off the ground this year as a 250. Obviously, Ann and the team in New Haven had to sell that event. So I think there are two parts to this question. One is there were a lot more WTA tournaments in the United States 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and they've started to dwindle a bit. So if that's the case, maybe that does say that, at least in this case, that the women's tour and the men's tour do need to merge. Okay, why not have Atlanta be a men's and women's event? Why not have Winston-Salem be a men's and women's event? A lot of them are holding exos that are women's exos at men's events. So I
Yeah.
guess, is there a problem, and could this be the solution, more of a merger between a lot of these events?
Well, your question is requires a the answer is complex.
Yeah.
So, yes, the best product of tennis is men and women together. That is what makes it unique and different to any other sport. We see it at the slams, we see it in Miami, Indian Wells, etc. It's the best. In the US, if you look at sports, so if you take tennis in the US, tennis in the rest of the world, tennis in most of Europe is the number two sport in the world behind soccer. Um, if you take tennis in the US, it's not the NFL, it's not the NBA. There's not a, set season where there's a playoff at the end and, big party. This is a global tour. So it's different from the American leagues. And so in the US, it is hard to compete against those leagues where there are teams that have really intense fan bases.
Yeah.
And the approach from a fan perspective is a little bit different because it's in addition to, so I'm a huge Buccaneers fan. And, I'm going to follow that whole NFL season. And every Sunday, I am going in the fall, I'm going to sit in front of my TV. But before it starts, I am going to go to the US Open, and that's kind of here's my space for sports.
Right.
So I'm going to go to the US Open. And if I can, I'm going to go up to the BNP Paribas in Indian Wells. But that's kind of how I perceive the consumption of tennis to be in the US. Also, to play in high school. My oldest son played football in high school, and he was competing against every other freshman who wanted to be on the football team. My daughter played tennis in high school. Actually, my son did too in the spring, but my daughter played tennis in high school, and there was no comparison between, here's the tennis pool of kids that want to play, and here's the pool of football players. So I think in the US, it starts with grassroots, and it's a cultural thing. Whereas for those of us who've grown up outside of the US, you get tennis from the moment that you can watch television or play a sport. Does that make sense?
It does, and the good thing is there's no shortage of American players coming up the ranks on the WTA side. I mean, Jen
Yeah,
Brady, for one, is
yeah.
where did she come from? But it's unbelievable. And then you have a whole host of others that are coming up the ranks. So, from an American standpoint, that is very positive. Um, and I know that the USTA is excited about it. I wanted to ask a quick question, Mickey. Should Ash Barty be the number one player in the world right now?
That's a tough question because it you know what it has not been an open or fair playing field in terms of Ash couldn't travel. The rankings had to be frozen. So it is very hard. You're thinking Naomi has played more, and she's amazing. Let's face it, she's amazing. But Ash is amazing too.
Yep.
Ash is probably, at least from a personal point of view, she is probably the best athlete I have ever seen in my life. Ash Barty can play anything. That girl owns and controls the ball, the club, the bat, the racket. She's unbelievable. And so is Naomi. So, the great thing for us is that we've got, out of the last 15 majors, I think we've had 12 winners. And people say, oh, well, that's very hard to market. Yeah, no, it's not. It shows the incredible depth of field. And also, if you think back to the 80s, and when tournaments started getting very interesting was in the semis. Now it's from round one.
When I look at what happened, the rankings were frozen last March when Indian Wells shut down, and it kind of is what it is. I mean, Ash Barty didn't do
Yeah.
anything wrong. Um, so I think a
No,
lot of people just need to be educated as to why that is, rather than just saying, I don't know why Ash Barty's number one in the world. But anyway, that's going to ultimately fix itself this year. Uh,
correct.
so
Well,
lastly,
yes.
Lastly, Mickey, and I know that this is very important to you. Yesterday, the original nine, the Trailblazers, the Trailblazing women who started women's tennis as we know it, were nominated as a group to be inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame. I was thinking about that and how far these women have come. I think the Virginia Slim's famous slogan was "You've come a long way, baby." They certainly have, not just them, but all of the female tennis players. I'm sure you know this, but 9 out of 10 female tennis players are the highest paid female athletes in the world. I mean, that's pretty incredible. With Naomi being
Yeah.
at the top right now. Um, so when you look at what happened yesterday with the original nine, and then you think about how far the game has come, and now you sit atop with Steve Simon of the WTA Tour. Does it does it motivate you more? Let's keep going and going and going, um, or does it, also give you pride that look how far that we've come? What are the feelings, Mickey? It's for somebody in your position, it must be emotional to see the tour come that far since the original nine
It,
started.
it is very emotional, and it's both motivation and pride that fuels the fire to keep going. Steve has, he's a tireless worker, and what he's been able to do in terms of keeping things moving through this period is pretty amazing. Because when this happened, and everything became very vulnerable, because everything we do gets reinvested in the game, so things became vulnerable, and we were really, really motivated to, let's stay as close to the finish line throughout this crisis as we can, in order not to lose the ground that we've gained, because everyone's worked so hard. And a testament to that is, if you see, we've talked a lot about the Australian quarantine, and players have posted, and that is a huge effort. It was a huge effort by Tennis Australia and the Australian government, and a huge testament to who they are and what they represent. But for the players to be locked up in a hotel room for 14 days, yes, it's a nice, you can't call it a prison, no, that's not what I'm saying. And people are going to think, whoa, that's a major sacrifice for the checks that they took home. But traveling today is really hard. You have a painful test before, you have a painful test after. It's kind of eerie to be sitting on a plane with very few people, and you're traveling at night, it's dark, the streets are empty. It's very disconcerting.
Yeah.
And it none of the players have said, I can't do this.
Yeah.
They have all stepped up and done what they had to do, which is really admirable in my opinion, because I know it has not been easy. The NBA players who had to be in a bubble for months, those that structure is necessary, but it's difficult. And of course, you have to do it to maintain your livelihood. But still, I think it's good to stop and think, and pay respect to all of those who worked so hard to make that happen, including the players.
Oh, sure. The players, and then when you look at the U.S. Open, Stacey Allister and her whole team, and then Craig Tiley, uh, the work that when you are closer to it than I am, the work that went behind the scenes to make all of those events happen. And you're right, the bravery of the players to get there and play Grand Slams and do what they love. So we'll just hope
Mhm.
we'll just
Yeah.
hope it's more of the same.
Yeah, I was going to say that, to your question of the original nine, and how grateful we are to be working in their footsteps and to be protecting their legacy. That is quite an honor, because when you when you think about what they gave up, and everything that they risked everything
Yeah.
to do what's right, and to say, hey, wait a second, guys, no, we deserve more than this, we're going to do better than this. So we owe them literally eternal gratitude, and they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, and they deserve to be in every Hall of Fame all around the world.
The last person I'll say that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame one day is Micky Lawler, without a doubt, as certainly as a contributor, maybe as a player. I haven't seen you play a lot, Mickey, but I'm sure.
No, yeah, no, not as a player, not as a player, and yeah, I'm not even going to go there. No, but thank you. That's very kind of you, Randy.
Well, it's my
Thank you.
pleasure, and Mickey, I think you are a treasure to our sport. Your work ethic, your commitment to the players, your commitment to growing the game, doing everything you can to keep this great sport thriving on a global basis. We all thank you for it, and I'm in it with you. I'm in it with everybody. I've been in the tennis business a long time, but anyway, thanks for being my 50th guest. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Randy. It's been an honor to be your 50th guest, and best of luck on this show. It's really great.